All right, so we're diving deep today into all those fascinating conversations you've shared.
Yeah, about travel and food and even culture and tech
Exactly. We're talking about everything from how you approach gift giving.
to those big questions about AI you were pondering.
And remember that thing about a place trying to, like, completely get rid of all predators by 2050?
Oh yeah, that was a wild one.
Feel we can unpack that. And how about those Thai street food stalls? Are they really as risky as some folks say?
It's going to be fascinating to connect the dots between what you do and the why behind it.
I love that. Okay, let's jump in. So first up, that debate you had with your friend about minimalism, that was hilarious.
Oh yeah.
They're all about paring down just the bare essentials, right?
Right.
And you, on the other hand, well, let's just say you embrace the pack rat lifestyle.
Proudly.
Exactly. And the umbrella situation. I mean, 5 or 6 is totally reasonable, you argue.
Oh, absolutely. You need a small one for portability, obviously.
Yeah.
Then the big one for those monsoon-style downpours.
Right. Yeah.
And then, a decorative one for fun. Why not?
Exactly. So this whole thing about minimalism, is it really just about how much stuff you have?
That's a great question. I mean, is it really about the number of things, or is it more about, like, how attached we are to them?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we even define essential? Something that's totally essential for one person might be like clutter for someone else.
Sure.
It makes you think about mindful living, being more aware of our consumption habits and making choices that, align with what we really value.
It's about intentionality.
Exactly. Not deprivation, but intention.
Speaking of intention, that travel bug of yours has bitten hard. All those conversations about England, Thailand, Spain.
Bali, Indonesia.
You've practically been everywhere.
It's been amazing. And what's really interesting is the contrast, between Western culture and that warmth and social connection you experienced in Southeast Asia.
It really makes you think, right? How cultural norms shape how we interact, what we expect, even our sense of self.
Totally.
And speaking of cultural differences, we have to share this story. You were talking about how, coming from a small town, you were maybe a little too trusting in strangers when you first got to Italy.
Oh, yeah. There were definitely some naive moments.
We can laugh about it now, but it's fascinating how travel exposes those blind spots.
It forces us to adapt and grow.
Absolutely. Those culture shock moments can be kind of cringy at the time, but they're amazing opportunities.
For sure. For learning, for self-discovery.
Like holding up a mirror to your own cultural assumptions.
Exactly. And realizing, wow, there are so many other ways of being in the world.
Totally. Okay, from cultural immersion to culinary exploration, let's talk food. This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because you, an American, you don't like hamburgers. Shocking, I know.
I know.
But before we revoke your passport, we have to talk about your love for Thai street food.
Oh, it's amazing.
You rave about the flavors, the fresh ingredients.
Yeah.
Clearly, you have an adventurous palate.
I do. And, let's debunk a myth here.
Okay.
Street food in Southeast Asia, it's not inherently unsafe. It's a huge part of their culture.
Right.
The vendors often take immense pride in the quality and cleanliness.
You've got some smart strategies, too, for navigating it all.
Oh, yeah.
Like re-grilling things for that extra peace of mind.
It can't hurt.
Genius. And that Taiwanese thing with the hot water buckets for sanitizing.
That's brilliant. A great example of cultural adaptation and, resourcefulness.
Totally. And speaking of resourcefulness, we can't forget your famous crunchy, chunky salad.
Oh, that's a good one.
Chopped fruits, veggies, all about that textural delight.
It's a symphony of crunch.
Speaking of cultural adaptations, how about a blast from the past? Life before smartphones, social media, even bottled water was a novelty.
Wow, yeah.
Remember waiting by the phone for a call? No clue who it was, no message, pure anticipation.
It's amazing how technology has completely transformed how we communicate, how we connect.
Has it been for the better, though?
That's the big question. This tech fluency, how easily we use technology, it's constantly evolving. Each generation has its own learning curve.
Oh, absolutely. And you brought up bottled water. Like, for those of us who grew up with perfectly fine tap water,
right,
paying for water in a plastic bottle, bizarre.
It shows how ideas about necessity and convenience can change so drastically.
And another thing, the decline of outdoor play. We were practically shoot outside as kids, no matter what.
Go get some fresh air.
Exactly. Now it's the opposite. Kids glued to screens, parents worried about safety.
It makes you wonder if we've lost sight of the value of boredom.
Boredom.
Yeah, those unstructured hours were actually so important. for creativity, problem solving, even social skills.
Interesting point. Okay, from boredom to the potential minefield of gift giving, you seem to have some complicated feelings about it.
I do. It can be tricky.
We saw that story about the homemade basketball hoop and those treasured socks with the little flowers. Some
Oh.
gifts just hit the mark, right?
Absolutely. But then you also had that giant teddy bear, the one you didn't want,
Oh, yeah. And that lime green shirt,
with the rib texture.
you know, one you desperately tried to hide. Gift giving is a minefield sometimes.
It really is. So many cultural nuances and expectations. In some cultures, it's all about practicality, while in others, it's about symbolism, social obligation.
So much pressure.
But at the end of the day, it boils down to thoughtfulness.
Thoughtfulness.
Yeah, a truly meaningful gift comes from understanding the other person, their needs, their values.
It's about connection, not just stuff.
Exactly. It really is. So fascinating how even simple things like shoes,
Right.
they can reveal so much about our values, our priorities.
Okay, speaking of things that can be baffling, you brought up a topic that always sparks debate: disciplining kids in public.
Oh, yeah.
You described your own approach, like calmly removing your child from the situation
Uh-huh.
and addressing things quietly.
Right.
It's a great example of how cultural norms and personal values intersect.
Totally. There's no one right way to parent.
Oh, for sure.
What works for one family might not work for another,
Right.
but your approach, it prioritizes empathy, respect.
Both for your child and for the people around you.
Exactly. It's about setting those boundaries, but also responding with compassion.
Finding that balance.
And you talked about planning ahead, anticipating your kids' needs to, like, prevent those meltdowns.
Being proactive.
Yeah, it can make a huge difference. But, of course, kids are unpredictable.
Oh, absolutely.
Sometimes those meltdowns, they're just going to happen.
Speaking of things that can be a bit unpredictable, the cold shoulder. You admitted to doing it yourself sometimes.
Oh, yeah, in moments of frustration.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
But you also acknowledged it's not exactly the most mature way to handle conflict.
Not really.
Why do we do it, though?
I think deep down, we want the other person to just know they messed up.
Without actually having to say it.
Right. It's like, you should just know.
You also pointed out it can be kind of manipulative,
It can be.
making the other person feel guilty without actually talking about the issue.
Right. Not exactly healthy communication.
Learning to communicate directly,
Yeah.
respectfully, even when it's hard.
It's a sign of real emotional maturity.
Speaking of things that can be hard to communicate, unsolicited advice.
Yeah, we've all been on the receiving end of that.
Right. Those well-meaning advice givers who just appear out of nowhere, ready to dispense their wisdom.
Even if you asked for it or not.
You talked about how frustrating it is when people offer advice without really understanding the situation.
Or your perspective.
It's like they're just waiting for their turn to talk, not really listening.
It can feel so invalidating, especially when it's coming from someone who, hasn't walked in your shoes.
Sometimes, let's be honest, they just want to make themselves feel better.
Sometimes.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the best thing we can do is just listen.
Just listen, offer support.
And resist that urge to play armchair therapist.
Exactly.
Okay, from advice givers to animal lovers, let's talk about your fondness for the animal kingdom. You mentioned that one of your favorite things to do at the zoo is watch the giraffes.
Oh, yeah, they're so graceful.
You describe them as looking soft and friendly.
They do.
You even confessed to wishing you could touch one.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
And then you told that hilarious story about the pony ride gone wrong when you were a kid.
Oh, that pony was not having it.
Clearly.
Yeah.
But your true animal love seems to be reserved for goats.
They're the best.
You called them fantastic and very social.
They are so playful and affectionate.
And you had that sweet story about how the goats on your family farm would follow you around.
They were like my little entourage.
That's adorable. You also brought up a really interesting point about how growing up on a farm shaped your views on hunting and guns.
Oh, absolutely.
You talked about how your family had rifles, shotguns,
For hunting, for protecting the livestock.
and you even used them for target practice.
Yeah. In rural areas, guns are often seen as tools.
Essential for work, for recreation.
It's a completely different context than in, say, an urban environment.
But you also mentioned you were always a bit uneasy around handguns.
Yeah, they always felt kind of weird to me.
It's interesting how, even within a family, a community, there can be such different comfort levels.
Different perspectives.
And it highlights how our personal experiences are so intertwined with our beliefs, our values.
Yeah, absolutely.
You also drew this fascinating contrast between American attitudes towards guns and the reactions of your Japanese students when they learned about your childhood.
Oh, yeah.
They were shocked, horrified.
By the idea of teenagers driving cars, even more so by the thought of having a gun at home.
It's amazing how cultural norms shape our perceptions of what's normal, what's acceptable.
What seems commonplace in one culture can be totally alien in another.
Okay, from guns to glamour. Let's talk about your personal style, your shopping habits.
Okay.
You mentioned this rule you have about never spending more than $100 on a pair of shoes.
Unless they're dress shoes for work.
Right. So you prioritize practicality, value over, trendy or expensive footwear.
I do, which is funny because I also admitted to being a bit of a shopaholic.
Oh, the thrill of the hunt.
I love finding a good deal.
And speaking of good deals, your Japanese students were amazed by the low prices of clothing in Thailand.
Oh, yeah. Like $6 for a pair of jeans?
It's crazy how much the cost of living can vary around the world.
It really is. It makes you realize that value is a relative concept.
Influenced by everything from labor costs to cultural perceptions of quality.
Exactly. And you had that contrasting experience in Europe.
Oh, yeah.
You were shocked by how expensive souvenirs were.
Tourist traps.
They know visitors are eager to take home a piece of their experience.
And they're willing to pay a premium for it.
That's for sure.
Okay, from souvenirs to the slightly less glamorous task of packing boxes.
Oh, no.
Moving. You're feeling overwhelmed by all the stuff you've accumulated.
It's a lot. The packing, the cleaning. It can feel like a monumental task.
It can be. But moving is also a chance to reassess, to let go of things you no longer need.
To simplify, to declutter.
Maybe even unearth some hidden treasures.
Ooh, I like that. And you told that story about accidentally throwing away some important documents.
It happens in the chaos of cleaning.
It highlights the importance of staying organized, taking it one step at a time.
Right.
Moving can be chaotic, but it can also be a fresh start.
A chance to create a new space that reflects who you are now.
I love that perspective. And you were thinking about getting rid of some possessions before the move.
Downsizing.
It's a smart strategy.
Yeah.
Minimizes the stress, the cost.
Plus, there's something liberating about letting go.
It creates space, physically, mentally, for new experiences, new possibilities.
And from the practicalities of moving to the complexities of cultural exchange, we were fascinated by your insights into gift-giving etiquette in Japan.
Oh, yes. It's a whole different world.
You mentioned it's customary to give gifts to colleagues, acquaintances.
On certain occasions.
Like starting a new job, moving to a new neighborhood.
Gift giving in Japan, it's rooted in tradition, in social harmony.
It's not just about the object itself.
It's about the gesture, the symbolism, the unspoken language of respect, reciprocity.
You drew an interesting contrast with the U.S.
Where gift giving is usually more casual.
More reserved for, close friends and family.
Right. It's often associated with special occasions.
Birthdays, holidays.
But in Japan, it's woven into everyday life.
Strengthening bonds, expressing gratitude.
Navigating social hierarchies.
You even had that hilarious story about giving a gift that was considered too personal.
Oh, yeah. It's a good reminder that what might seem thoughtful in one culture
can be misconstrued in another.
Cultural nuances. Even with the best intentions, we can stumble into awkward situations.
But those missteps can be valuable learning experiences.
For sure. They remind us to be humble, to be curious.
To approach cultural differences with an open mind.
And a sense of humor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, from gift-giving etiquette to the universal pursuit of well-being.
Okay.
You had some really insightful thoughts about the challenges of maintaining a healthy lifestyle in today's world.
It's not easy.
You talked about trying to eat healthy, exercise regularly,
Mm-hmm.
but you also admitted to having a weakness for sweets.
Who doesn't?
It's all about balance, right?
Exactly. Depriving ourselves completely usually backfires.
And you emphasize the importance of sleep,
Oh, absolutely.
which is often the first thing to go when we're busy, stressed.
Sleep is crucial. It's when our bodies and minds repair, recharge,
Chronic sleep deprivation.
leads to all sorts of problems, irritability, poor concentration, even serious health issues down the line.
You aim for 7 to 8 hours a night.
A good goal for most adults.
Creating a consistent sleep routine, a relaxing bedtime ritual.
It can make a world of difference.
And you also talked about the importance of mental health, especially in today's world, which can feel so chaotic, demanding.
It's true. You shared your own experiences with stress, anxiety, and how you've found exercise to be such a helpful coping mechanism.
It really can be. Exercise has so many benefits.
Physical and mental.
Releases endorphins, reduces stress hormones, improves sleep quality.
It's like a magic potion.
You also mentioned practicing mindfulness techniques like meditation to calm your mind.
Mindfulness is about being present.
aware of our thoughts and feelings without judgment,
It's a powerful tool for managing stress, cultivating self-compassion.
finding those moments of peace amidst the chaos.
Exactly. And you brought up a really important point about technology's impact on our mental well-being.
Oh, yeah.
That constant barrage of information, notifications,
It'd be so overwhelming.
it can contribute to stress, anxiety.
We've become so tethered to our devices.
It's true. It's important to set boundaries.
Schedule some downtime.
Engage in activities that don't involve screens.
You talked about setting limits on screen time, making a conscious effort to disconnect,
It's about reclaiming control.
being intentional with our technology use instead of letting it control us.
And remembering that real life, those face-to-face connections, those moments of quiet contemplation.
That's where true fulfillment lies.
I completely agree.
Okay, from the inner world to the outer world, you shared some fascinating observations about cultural customs and traditions from your travels.
Oh yeah, like that funny story about Christmas in Japan.
It's celebrated so differently than in the U.S.
It is. In Japan, it's more of a commercial holiday.
More of a romantic occasion for couples.
Right. Exchanging gifts, indulging in festive treats like Christmas cake.
You were surprised to learn that most Japanese people don't celebrate with their families or go to church.
It's a good reminder that the meaning of holidays can vary drastically across cultures.
And the food.
Mm-hmm.
Fried chicken instead of the traditional turkey dinner.
It just goes to show there's no one right way to celebrate.
Each culture has its own unique traditions, its own blend of flavors and rituals.
Exactly. And you talked about Halloween in Australia.
Becoming more and more popular.
A relatively new tradition imported from the U.S.
Interesting to see how cultural customs spread and evolve in a globalized world.
Globalization has definitely blurred the lines between cultures.
Traditions travel, they adapt, they blend.
It's a dynamic process.
You mentioned that more and more Australians are decorating their homes, dressing up,
Taking their kids trick-or-treating.
and some people are resistant to it.
They see it as a foreign holiday, too commercialized.
Cultural change isn't always easy or universally embraced.
It can be challenging to reconcile new ideas with deeply held traditions.
Speaking of cultural differences, you had an insightful conversation about personal space and physical touch.
Oh, yes, particularly between the U.S. and Southeast Asia.
You talked about being initially uncomfortable with all the touching in Thailand.
People touching your arm, your shoulder during conversations.
It's so different from the U.S., where personal space is highly valued.
It's fascinating how different cultures have such different norms around touch.
What's seen as friendly and welcoming in one culture,
Can be perceived as intrusive or even aggressive in another.
and you told that funny story about bumping into someone in Thailand,
Oh, yeah. I apologize profusely.
and the person just laughed and said it was no problem.
Cultural differences can lead to those awkward moments.
But they can also be opportunities for laughter, for connection.
Absolutely. And how about that conversation about punctuality?
Oh, yeah. You were initially frustrated by the more relaxed approach to time in Thailand.
People arriving late for appointments, events.
So different from the U.S., where punctuality is a sign of respect, professionalism.
It's interesting how different cultures view time.
In the U.S., time is a commodity.
Something to be managed, maximized.
But in other cultures, time might be seen as more fluid, more cyclical.
And then you told that anecdote about waiting for a friend in Thailand.
Oh, yeah.
They showed up over an hour late, totally unfazed.
Classic culture clash moment.
It reminds us that we all operate within our own cultural frameworks
And those frameworks can sometimes collide.
in unexpected ways.
And from the concept of time to the world of education, you shared some really interesting insights into the differences between the U.S. and Chinese education systems.
They are vastly different.
You were struck by the rigor of the Chinese system, with its long school days, intense competition.
And the emphasis on rote memorization.
The Chinese system is deeply rooted in Confucian values.
Discipline, hard work, respect for authority.
And you contrasted that with the U.S. system.
More relaxed, more student-centered.
Emphasis on critical thinking and creativity.
Both systems have their strengths, their weaknesses.
The Chinese system excels at producing high-achieving students, especially in STEM fields.
But it's often criticized for stifling creativity, individuality.
And the U.S. system, well, it's praised for fostering critical thinking.
But sometimes seen as lacking rigor.
You also talked about teaching English in Japan.
Oh, yes.
You noted that Japanese students are generally respectful, eager to learn.
But they can also be shy, reluctant to speak up in class.
Cultural norms play such a big role in learning styles, classroom behavior.
In some cultures, questioning authority is encouraged.
In others, it's seen as disrespectful.
A good teacher understands those nuances, adapts their approach.
From education to economics, you had a thought-provoking conversation about cultural attitudes towards money, wealth.
Particularly between the U.S. and Southeast Asia.
You were struck by the importance of family and community in Thailand.
How people often share resources, support each other financially.
Collectivism is deeply ingrained in many Southeast Asian cultures.
The well-being of the family, the community, comes first.
So different from the U.S., where individualism, self-reliance are so highly valued.
The American dream is all about individual achievement.
Upward mobility.
But that focus on individual success can sometimes come at the expense of social cohesion.
And you observed that people in Thailand seemed less materialistic,
More content with what they have.
despite having lower incomes.
It's a good reminder that happiness isn't solely determined by material wealth.
Different cultures have different definitions of success, different priorities.
And then you dove into the ethics of tipping,
Oh yeah, that's a tricky one.
fraught with ambiguity, cultural differences.
You mentioned being uncomfortable with tipping in the U.S.
It feels arbitrary, confusing,
So different from Japan, where tipping is not customary.
often seen as insulting.
You raised some important ethical questions.
Does tipping create a power imbalance? Does it perpetuate income inequality?
You believe service workers should be paid a living wage.
Tipping shouldn't be necessary,
Fair wages, labor rights should be the norm.
not contingent on tips.
From the ethics of tipping to the cultural significance of food, you had an interesting conversation about eating habits and attitudes towards food.
Especially between the U.S. and Japan.
You were impressed by the emphasis on presentation aesthetics in Japanese cuisine.
Japanese cuisine is an art form.
It's not just about sustenance.
It's about the beauty of the presentation, the harmony of flavors, the seasonality of ingredients,
Such a contrast with the U.S.
where food is often seen as more functional.
More about convenience, abundance.
Right. Portion sizes in the U.S. tend to be much larger than in many other countries.
And you notice that Japanese people tend to eat smaller portions.
They're generally more health conscious.
You even told a story about struggling to finish a large plate of food in Japan.
Cultural differences and expectations around food consumption.
What might seem like a normal portion in one culture can be overwhelming in another.
Okay, from food to the wisdom of age. You had a fascinating conversation about cultural attitudes towards aging and the elderly.
Especially between the U.S. and Southeast Asia.
Right. You were impressed by the respect shown towards the elderly in Thailand.
They're often seen as wise, valuable members of the community.
In many Asian cultures, elders are revered for their experience, their wisdom,
It's a contrast to the Western emphasis on youth.
where aging is seen as something to be fought against.
Hidden.
It's a fascinating cultural dichotomy.
In some cultures, aging is associated with decline.
In others, it's associated with wisdom, respect.
And you noted that the elderly in Thailand often live with their families, play an active role.
Whereas in the U.S., the elderly are often more isolated.
Family structures, social safety nets, play a huge role in how a society cares for its elderly.
In some cultures, it's the family's responsibility to care for aging parents.
In others, that responsibility often falls to institutions.
You told that heartwarming story about a young person in Thailand offering their seat on the bus to an elderly person.
Such a small gesture, but it speaks volumes.
About a culture's values.
Okay, from the wisdom of elders to the ultimate mystery of life and death, you had a thought-provoking conversation about cultural beliefs and practices surrounding death.
It's a topic that's often avoided.
But it's a universal human experience.
You mentioned being fascinated by the elaborate funeral rituals in Thailand.
The colorful processions, the offerings of food and incense.
The belief in reincarnation.
Buddhist funeral rites are often seen as a celebration of life.
A transition to a new spiritual journey.
Such a contrast with the more somber funeral practices in the U.S.
Where death is often treated as a taboo subject.
We grieve privately, we mourn in muted tones.
It's a stark contrast to cultures where death is more openly acknowledged, more integrated into life.
And then you discuss the different beliefs about the afterlife.
Heaven and hell, reincarnation, the continuation of the spirit in some other form.
Beliefs about the afterlife offer comfort, meaning
They help us to cope with loss, to make sense of our own mortality.
to imagine what lies beyond.
You shared your own personal beliefs, saying you're not sure what happens after we die.
But you find comfort in the idea that our spirits might live on.
It's a mystery that has captivated humans for centuries.
We long to believe that there's something more.
That death isn't the end.
Whether we find solace in religion, spirituality, or simply the enduring legacy of our lives.
We all grapple with these questions in our own way.
And you stress the importance of talking about death, preparing for our own mortality,
Even though it can be uncomfortable.
having open and honest conversations with loved ones.
About our wishes for end-of-life care.
It can help us to make informed decisions, ensure that our final days are spent with dignity.
In alignment with our values. It's a reflection of that human need to make sense of things, to find comfort when faced with the unknown.
To find meaning.
Exactly. You also talked about different beliefs about what happens after we die.
Heaven and hell, reincarnation. The idea that our spirits might live on in some form.
It's fascinating how these beliefs offer comfort, a sense of guidance,
A way to cope with loss.
and to imagine what might be waiting for us beyond this life.
You shared your own beliefs, saying you're not sure what happens.
Right.
But you find comfort in the idea that maybe, just maybe, our spirits do live on in some way.
It's a mystery that's captivated us for, well, forever, really.
It has.
This deep-seated longing to believe that there's something more.
That death isn't the end.
And whether we find that comfort in religion, spirituality,
Or just the legacy we leave behind.
we all wrestle with these questions.
We do. And you brought up how important it is to talk about death, to prepare for it.
Even though it can be such a tough conversation.
It can. Having those open and honest conversations with loved ones about our wishes, end-of-life care.
It can be incredibly meaningful, I think.
It can. It brings peace of mind
Knowing you've made those decisions.
and ensuring those final days are spent the way you want.
With dignity, in line with your values.
Speaking of things we find comforting, we have to circle back to your love for animals.
Of course.
You mentioned those giraffes at the zoo, how you love watching them.
They really are mesmerizing.
You said they look so soft and friendly.
I'd love to touch one someday.
And who could forget that story of the pony ride gone wrong?
That pony definitely had other plans.
But your true animal love, goats.
Oh, they're the best.
You describe them as fantastic.
They are. And so social.
And remember that story about how they'd follow you around on the farm?
Like a little posse.
You also talked about how that experience on the farm really shaped how you view animal welfare, the whole ethics of factory farming.
It changes your perspective. Seeing animals up close like that. Understanding their needs.
Realizing they're not just commodities.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift gears back to your travels and those cultural insights you've gained.
Always fascinating.
You shared such a vivid account of New Year's celebrations in Japan.
Very different from the U.S.
It sounds like it. A time for reflection, spiritual renewal.
Connecting with family and tradition.
And you were surprised to learn that many Japanese people visit temples and shrines on New Year's Eve.
To pray for good luck.
Religion and spirituality are so deeply intertwined with cultural celebrations.
They offer a sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves.
Seeking guidance, blessings for the year ahead.
Exactly. And then there are the special foods, like mochi,
That delicious rice cake.
associated with good luck, prosperity,
A symbol of new beginnings.
a sweet start to the new year.
You also brought up the custom of gift giving in Japan, how it's common to give gifts to colleagues, acquaintances.
On certain occasions, of course.
It's fascinating how ingrained it is in their culture.
It's about expressing gratitude, strengthening bonds.
Navigating social hierarchies.
Right. A complex social dance.
So different from the U.S., where gift giving is more casual, usually reserved for close friends, family.
The meaning and expectations surrounding gift giving can vary so much across cultures.
And you even shared a funny story about a time you gave a gift that was considered too personal.
Oops.
A reminder that those cultural missteps can happen.
Especially when we're venturing into unfamiliar territory.
But those blunders, they can be great learning experiences,
They can, a chance to grow, to understand,
reminding us to be humble, to be curious.
and to approach those cultural differences with an open mind and a sense of humor.
Absolutely. Speaking of venturing into unfamiliar territory, you've got a real knack for languages.
I enjoy the challenge.
French, Japanese,
Hey.
Spanish, bit of Swedish. It's amazing.
Learning a language opens up so many doors, new ways of thinking.
Connecting with people from different cultures.
It's so rewarding.
You've studied French for 5 years?
I did. Not fluent anymore, but I still love the language.
Even if we don't become fluent, that process of learning
It's transformative.
stretches our minds,
Yeah.
introduces us to new cultures.
You talked about learning Japanese, too?
I can still speak a little bit.
Maintaining those skills takes effort. But even a basic grasp of another language can really enhance your travels.
Open doors to new friendships.
And then that story about learning Swedish in a week.
Just enough to teach a basic class.
That's incredible.
And to think, you even had a funny anecdote about struggling with English grammar.
Even native speakers can get tripped up.
Language is constantly evolving.
It keeps us on our toes.
From the complexities of language to the vastness of space, you had a really interesting conversation about space exploration.
It's a topic I'm passionate about.
You're a big proponent of continued investment in the field.
Absolutely. Space exploration has always captured the human imagination.
Yes.
It's about pushing boundaries, exploring the unknown.
You argue that it's essential for advancing our understanding of the universe.
And for developing new technologies that can benefit us all.
GPS navigation, satellite communication, medical imaging techniques.
All spin-offs from space exploration.
And you pointed out that it inspires future generations.
Encouraging them to pursue careers in STEM fields.
Science, technology, engineering, math.
Exactly. Those fields are critical for driving innovation, progress.
But you also acknowledge that space exploration is expensive.
It is. We have to consider the trade-offs.
The question of whether those resources could be better used elsewhere.
To address pressing issues here on Earth.
Poverty, hunger, disease.
It's a valid question.
It is. But you also made the point that space exploration offers a unique perspective.
A sense of awe, of wonder that transcends our earthly concerns.
It reminds us of our place in this vast cosmos.
Gazing up at the stars, it's humbling.
It makes our problems feel smaller.
It does. It reminds us of the interconnectedness of all things.
Speaking of interconnectedness, we need to talk about your conversation on homelessness.
A very real issue, unfortunately.
You expressed concern about the growing number of people experiencing homelessness.
Especially in urban areas.
It's a complex issue.
It is. Poverty, mental illness, addiction, lack of affordable housing.
So many factors contribute.
And it's important to remember that people experiencing homelessness, they're not making a choice.
They're often facing multiple challenges.
They deserve compassion, support.
You shared your own experiences encountering people experiencing homelessness.
I try to treat everyone with respect.
Offer help when you can.
Even small acts of kindness can make a difference.
And you talked about advocating for systemic change.
For policies and programs that address those root causes.
Affordable housing, job training programs, mental health services.
It's about creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
And then you had this really profound conversation about death and dying.
It's a topic we often avoid, but it's a universal human experience.
It is. You believe that death is a natural part of life.
Something to be embraced, not feared.
Accepting our mortality.
It can be so liberating.
It allows us to appreciate life, to live more fully in the present.
And you talked about the importance of having those open conversations with loved ones about end-of-life care.
Making sure our final days are spent in a way that honors our values, our wishes.
It's about taking control, making informed decisions.
This has been an incredible journey, exploring your world, your hobbies, your habits, your hot takes on everything from minimalism to the mysteries of the universe.
It's been a pleasure sharing this deep dive with you.
And to you listening, we hope this has sparked some reflection.
Maybe even inspired you to embrace your own unique perspective.
Remember, it's not about being perfect or following every trend.
It's about finding what brings you joy, what aligns with your values.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep being awesomely you.